Now, what is important here? And there are two parts. The first part is to associate those principles to some personal, genuine stories that would emphasize you as a great cultural fit into Amazon's culture. And I know it sounds like a time-consuming task, and indeed that may well be the case, but I believe it's time well spent as compared to watching Jeff Bezos for an hour and just ending up entertained as after a Netflix movie. So my proposed approach here would be to invite you to watch the 2-minute video and write down your stories about the groups of principles that I determined in that content, and also eventually memorize them if you can. Okay, and maybe one note here, just try to use some keywords from the leadership principles when writing your own stories. Alright, now with respect to the second part of these leadership principles, it's the way that you should prepare yourself to answer questions related to them. For example, the easiest scenario is that Amazon will ask you to simply develop on a story on one of the principles, for example, the customer centricity. But what usually happens here is they will ask you a question that it's not directly related with the principles, and I'll give you an example in a moment. So the idea is to answer these questions as a story using the STAR method, and this is a method that Amazon advertises themselves, which basically means that every time you're answering a question, to think of a situation, of a task, of an action as a result. So I know there's a learning curve here, and I encourage you to take a look at some examples of both questions and answers of such scenarios, so feel free to pause the video here if you like. And finally, why it's important to both learn your own stories and how to answer them. Because you see, whenever you're being asked a question, you would have to first associate that question to a personal story that you have, and then prepare to answer it using the STAR method. Now, if you wouldn't have your own story at first, you would have to first make something up on the moment, and then think about answering it using the STAR method. So even if you end up memorizing the 14 leadership principles, which I don't recommend by the way, keep in mind that it's your ability to link the recruiter's question to your own personal story, to identify yourself with their culture, what's really matters here. And your story will be much better received if you manage to insert some keywords from the leadership principles, such as customer centricity or dive deep or ownership. Okay, so you sweat all the technical details, you nailed the leadership principles, and everybody interviewing you is happy. So your interview cannot go wrong, right? Then suddenly and out of nowhere there's some weird guy that doesn't even seem related with your team, but he's certainly an Amazonian, and it's certainly not Jeff Bezos, but he is asking you impossible questions. That guy is the bar raiser. He makes a living on the recruiting process, and his main job is to ask you some special questions in order to test you as a fit inside Amazon. Now, how do you react? And I believe the most important part here is to understand that Amazon is not usually looking for perfection. In fact, they are well used with various failures. Your best bet here is to make sure that you understand her question. And if you don't, make sure you ask subsequent questions until you do so. And as a general advice here, if you have a good imagination, that is, if you are good at systems thinking, it will very much help you to build an answer here. Properly nailing the leadership principles is a must, because you see, the bar raiser is there to check if you can increase the value of the team that you're applying to. And yes, they have veto power over your application. They are mainly there for corporate positions, so they are most likely not going to be involved in any warehouse job opportunities, for example. So while there's many speculation going on as to what is their real role, I would recommend you to make sure that you properly understand the question in the first place, because this is the most important part of this whole situation.